continue to come in, and that continuously expands your budgets. The second main category of beneficiaries is, of course, the criminal gangs and cartels that the present misguided official policies have empowered as the sole source of drugs in our society. Over the past 40 plus years, they have earned countless billions of dollars from the sale of illegal drugs, which, had they only been legal, would not have earned them a single penny. Who are the losers? First and most directly, those millions upon millions of good, non-violent people in our societies who have been jailed or otherwise punished for the possession and use of drugs. That's my cue to light up the rest of this here joint of cannabis, marijuana. Non-violent. Nobody has any right to tell you what you can and cannot put in your body. For it's yours, and it's your life. Learning from tobacco. A contrary example, but one that is most instructive, concerns the use of tobacco in our societies. Tobacco has never been illegal. Far from that, its use has been actively encouraged by clever advertising campaigns mounted by the multi-billion-dollar tobacco industry. But the use of tobacco does undoubtedly lead to great harms, both for the health of the individual and the health of society at large, and facts about these harms have been widely and successfully disseminated without a single tobacco user ever being arrested or persecuted. It's interesting in this connection to compare the success of public information campaigns about the dangers of tobacco use with the utter failure of public information campaigns about the dangers of marijuana use. The reason the anti-marijuana campaigns have failed is that millions of users know from their own direct, long-term experience that marijuana does not do them any great harm, and with reference to the most recent anti-marijuana propaganda, most definitely does not drive them mad. Reefer madness. The only madness there was in the minds of those believing in that propaganda. And the propaganda itself utterly mad. It may well be true that very small numbers of fragile teenagers whose mental health was already compromised have had their latent schizophrenia or other similar conditions worsened by the use of marijuana. But the vast majority of marijuana users are not at all affected in this way. Likewise, efforts by government agencies to persuade us that new, stronger strains of marijuana presently available on the market, e.g. skunk, are more skunk, skunk, are more dangerous to our health than traditional strains of marijuana because they deliver much more of the active ingredient THC to our systems, have not persuaded anyone. Regular marijuana users presented with a stronger strain simply adjust their consumption, consuming far less of it than they would of a weaker strain in order to achieve the same effect, and feel intuitively that smoking less of any substance has got to be better for their lungs and general health than smoking more. Duh. The consequence of this disconnect between personal experience and facts quote-unquote facts purveyed by official public information campaigns is that huge numbers of people no longer believe anything that our governments have to say to us about drugs. There is an increasingly widespread recognition that tainted, unreliable, and tendentious information is being passed on, information that cannot be trusted. And this distrust of official sources of information is, of course, only worsened by the propagandistic character, witch hunts, and scare tactics of the war on drugs, and by the realization that the health information purveyed in anti-drug campaigns is not underwritten by caring and nurturing official policies, but instead by draconian criminal sanctions and punitive authoritarian attitudes. Where the health hazards of tobacco use are concerned, on the other hand, since there are no criminal sanctions against tobacco users, no large armed bureaucracies to enforce them, and no special interests to serve by the dissemination of misleading information, the evidence has been accepted and believed by most rational adults, freely making up their own minds precisely as one would expect. The result, while the use of illegal drugs has everywhere skyrocketed over the past 40 years, regardless of the violent persecution of the users of these drugs, the use of tobacco in a climate of free choice and reliable information has plummeted to an all-time low. The consumption of tobacco, once seen as socially approved, even desirable, and indeed a stylish habit, has come to be regarded as a pariah-creating activity that only idiots would indulge themselves in. Although there are, of course, still many tobacco users, because nicotine is intensely addictive, their numbers continue to fall dramatically year on year as more and more of us make the free choice to give up the habit for the sake of our health. It is obvious that the tobacco model could be applied with equal success to all illegal drugs. Is it not obvious? Let me repeat that. Is it not obvious that the tobacco model could be applied with equal success to all illegal drugs? In other words, is it not obvious, if our governments really wish us to stop using drugs, that immediate legalization of adult personal use must follow? That the giant armed bureaucracies that persecute drug users must be closed down? And that the whole matter must be thrown open in the way that tobacco use has been thrown open to the effects of good, reliable information and the sound common sense of the vast majority of the population? If that happens, then we can be certain that drugs that are genuinely harmful to health and well-being, in the way that tobacco certainly is, will fall out of favor with their users in exactly the way that tobacco has done. And if it turns out that some of these drugs are in fact so harmful, then it should not concern us at all if some adults make the free choice to continue to use them. Of course, even against a backdrop of legalization and good information, some adults will make the free choice to continue to use genuinely harmful drugs as well, just as some adults today do continue to make the free choice to continue to use tobacco. But that too is as it should be in a truly free society. Republican Congressman Barney Frank was spot on the truth of what a free society really means when he announced a proposal in August 2008 to end federal penalties for Americans carrying fewer than 100 grams, almost a quarter of a pound of marijuana. Quote, "The vast amount of human activity ought to be none of the government's business," unquote, Frank said on Capitol Hill. I don't think it is the government's business to tell you how to spend your leisure time. It goes without saying that Frank's proposal is unlikely to succeed in the hysterical climate of disinformation that presently surrounds this subject. And we must ask ourselves why this should be so. Why are commonplace proposals for the legalization of drugs never adopted or even seriously considered by our governments? Why, on the contrary, are such proposals dogmatically opposed with even more propaganda and tainted information emanating from the big armed anti-drug bureaucracies? That legalization of drugs would shrink the budgets of those self-same bureaucracies and ultimately put them out of business is part of the answer. But to find the real engine that perpetuates the war on drugs, we need to look deeper and ask fundamental questions about the relationship between the individual and the state in modern Western democracies. Freedom of consciousness. What is Western civilization all about? What are its greatest achievements and highest aspirations? It's my guess that most people's replies to these questions would touch, before all, the other splendid achievements of science, literature, technology, and the economy, on the nurture and growth of freedom, individual freedom, including but not limited to freedom from the unruly power of monarchs, freedom from the unwarranted intrusions of the state and its agents into our personal lives, freedom from the tyranny of the church and its inquisition, freedom from hunger and want, freedom from slavery and servitude, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of thought and speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to elect our own leaders, freedom to be homosexual, and so on and so forth. The list of freedoms we enjoy today that were not enjoyed by our ancestors is indeed a long and impressive one. It is therefore exceedingly strange that Western civilization in the 21st century enjoys no real freedom of consciousness. There can be no more intimate and elemental part of the individual than his or her own consciousness. At the deepest level, our consciousness is what we are, to the extent that if we are not sovereign over our own consciousness, then we cannot in any meaningful sense be sovereign over anything else either. So it has to be highly significant that, far from encouraging freedom of consciousness, our societies in fact violently deny our right to sovereignty in this intensely personal area, and have effectively outlawed all states of consciousness other than those on a very narrowly defined and officially approved list. The war on drugs has thus unexpectedly succeeded in engineering a stark reversal of the true direction of Western history by empowering faceless bureaucratic authorities to send armed agents to break into our homes, arrest us, throw us into prison, and deprive us of our income and reputation simply because we wish to explore the sometimes radical, though always temporary, alterations in our own consciousness that drugs facilitate. Other than being against arbitrary rules that the state has imposed on us, personal drug use by adults is not a crime in any true moral or ethical sense, and usually takes place in the privacy of our own homes, where it cannot possibly do any harm to others. For some, it is a simple lifestyle choice. For others, particularly where the hallucinogens such as LSD, psilocybin, and DMT are concerned, it is a means to make contact with alternate realms and parallel dimensions, and perhaps even with the divine. For some, drugs are an aid to creativity and focused mental effort. For others, they are a means to tune out for a while from everyday cares and worries. But in the cases, it seems probable that the drive to alter consciousness, in all cases from which all drug use stems, has been genetic roots. Other adult lifestyle choices with deep genetic roots are also used to be violently persecuted by our societies. A notable example is homosexuality, once punishable by death or long periods of imprisonment, which is now entirely legal between consenting adults and fully recognized as being none of the state's business in all Western cultures. Although approximately 13 U.S. states have anti-sodomy laws outlawing homosexuality, these statutes have rarely been enforced in recent years, and in 2003 the U.S. Supreme Court invalidated those laws. The legalization of homosexuality